Welcome to the Emotional and Mental Health Summit. My name is Dolores Andrew Gavin and I'm your host. I am the founder of The Mythic Fairy, a dedicated children's website for all things emotional health. I'm also the author of 2 children's books, an empowerment and assertive coach, a podcaster, blogger and mum. I have 2 reasons, I guess, for doing this summit and bringing it together. And firstly, it's to support the whole conversation that's already there around emotional and mental health. And secondly, I also want to bring tools to people to show them that, I suppose, firstly, that there are tools that we can use to help us, whether that be learning something like emotional freedom technique or helping ourselves to step into our power by finding our voice. There are lots of different tools I'll share on this summit from the speakers that will be speaking. And also, of course, you also will hear from people who have been on a journey themselves. So it's always good to know that we're not alone and that others have travelled the same path possibly as ourselves. I hope that you enjoy the summit. Thanks for being here. Hello and welcome back to the Emotional and Mental Health Summit. My name is Dolores Andrew Gavin and today I'm joined by Joseph McGuire. Now, to say that this conversation really enthralls me is an understatement because the work that Joseph does is fascinating. So, a brief outline of what he does, but I'm going to let Joseph really take you through it himself. But what Joseph does is he does facial profiling. He's also an international negotiation consultant, a risk elimination consultant, and an author. Joseph, welcome to the summit and thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dolores. Absolute pleasure for me. Thank you.
So, where to start is always, when I see something so exciting and juicy to talk about, and especially in relation to it being as part of the Emotional and Mental Health Summit. Mm-hmm. But I do know that you're a therapist as well, and you have practiced shiatsu. So that's I suppose correct. I'd like to start off by asking where this journey has, how it has led you from the therapies that you did, because you were also trained in homeopathy, as far as I can remember you telling me. So how has this led to where you are now, Joseph?
Okay. Anybody who knows me will know there was never a master plan.
Yeah.
I practiced those therapies. Well, I started with shiatsu. I practiced shiatsu for pretty much close on 30 years. I was a homeopath for 15 years and a craniosacral therapist for 20 of those years. So it was a case of using which of those seemed appropriate at the time with any given situation and whatever people brought with them. I guess initially I sort of fell into doing shiatsu, but it just kind of it presented itself organically when I was living in London. I just meeting somebody who introduced me to someone, and I was fascinated, and I just decided to go for it. And I was introduced to face reading as one of the diagnostic techniques used in traditional Oriental medicine.
Oh, and that's where it has its origins then, is it?
Yeah. Like It goes back 3,000 years, but it was never just used in medicine. It was used in Chinese society, I guess, at large, particularly in business and politics as well, because the understanding, I guess the underpinning, if you like, of their basic philosophy was that mind, body and spirit are one inseparable unit. Sure. And that was part of what drew me anyway. So when I was introduced, as I said, to face reading as a diagnostic technique, it was always the person rather than, say, a kidney problem or a liver problem or whatever it happened to be. It was always the whole person. And that was part of what attracted me, because it just made such perfect sense intuitively as much as anything. And then I practiced, as I say, as a therapist between teaching and practicing for almost 30 years. But it reached a point where, as with, unfortunately, too frequently with many therapists, I wasn't taking proper care of myself. Mm-hmm. I was carrying a lot of stress. I was picking up a lot of stress from people, because even when people would come with ostensibly a back problem or migraine or whatever it was, just from touching them, I would know there was a lot of other stress underlying it. And I suppose I was effectively like a sponge. I was soaking it up. I got, obviously, between that and my own life challenges, it just reached a point where my body started to break down, and I started to develop illnesses. I was attracting viruses. I was getting structural problems, and it reached a point where anytime I gave a treatment, I needed a treatment. because my body was in such poor shape. And it was just the stress, the overload of stress that I hadn't dealt with
Wow.
myself.
Isn't
So
that amazing that, yeah, and that can happen, as you say. I mean, in often cases for therapists, that it seems to be like a sort of a giving nature too much, and not listening to the subtle information that our body actually gives us, until
yeah.
it becomes so unbearable that we actually have to listen, and it floors us.
Unfortunately, it's all too common. I mean, I've come across, in fact, I actually knew therapists who died because they weren't dealing with their stuff. And it's not like, if you look at doctors, for examtle, I'm clear that I was never a doctor, but if you look at doctors, they often have amongst the highest rates of divorce, alcoholism, and suicide. And it's obviously the massive stress overload they're dealing with. And particularly when one knows, as I did from my training, that the body is reflecting what's going on mentally and emotionally.
Yeah.
But I think I took on the whole male macho, not so much a macho thing, but the male thing of kind of, I'm a warrior, I'm tough, I'm strong, I can deal with it, I can handle it. And it just reached a point where I couldn't, because I wasn't
very
dealing with
honest
it.
saying that. It's great that you actually will say that, because unfortunately, yes, it's I guess it's societal as well, that there is this image that the male should be one way and that the female should be another way, and
Yeah.
you know, yeah, it can happen, and it's unfortunate, because like that, you know, there is a lot of talk about the divine feminine rising and all that, which is good, but like there's also the divine masculine in all of us as well.
Of course, absolutely. And it's a dangerous fallacy to think that men should be this and women should be that anyway. But unfortunately, it's so, I guess, hardwired into us to be a certain way, and thankfully it's changing. I'm certainly meeting more and more people in a general context, as well as in a business context, who are actively making changes in terms of being really positive about managing their well-being, physically, mentally, emotionally, and I guess spiritually as well. And that's very positive to see. But it's still I guess it's still a snowball that needs to turn into a positive avalanche, if I can put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, and the more conversations we have like this as well, I guess, about you talking about the emotional and mental aspects of the stress even that you suffered, you know, to the realization, the more that maybe somebody will resonate with it and realize maybe that's why their life is mirroring to them and is panning out the way it is. So I think it's good to have the conversations like this, and it's great to have men on the summit as well.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess, again, part of my training and part of my intuitive understanding was that the body is effectively a metaphor for how we are, and the body reflects what's going on internally, for better or for worse. And I knew it, and I just wasn't paying attention. It was kind of strange, because I was actually at the same time I was helping a lot of people, and genuinely helping a lot of people work through their stuff.
Sure.
And I was able to use some of my lessons for their benefit, but I paid a price. Yeah. Thankfully, I'm okay now, but good. I did pay a price. Yeah.
So what happened? What was the catalyst?
A lot of pain. Major relationship breakdowns, financial hammering, health issues, just having to completely rebuild my life from scratch.
Wow. Okay.
So it took me to that point where that was what made me wake up. But I was so stubborn that I just wasn't ready or willing until I absolutely crashed. Thankfully, I didn't crash as in terminally, and I've got things in place now to make sure I don't go there again ever. And I've had massive help from some amazing people, men and women. So I know what I'm doing now, and I'm managing myself on a daily basis in a much more constructive way. That just allows ease into my life and joy into my life that I just wasn't open to before.
That's great to hear.
Well, it was necessary, and it was just a wake up call. There was stuff I knew. There was stuff I knew I should be doing, could be doing.
Yeah.
I wasn't doing.
I think it's as therapists, sometimes, sorry for interrupting you. Yeah, you know, we know the stuff because we tell everybody else how to do it, but we're often at the end of our own queue.
Yeah, I was reminded today in another conversation of the George Bernard Shaw quote: "We teach the things we most need to learn."
For sure.
And some of us are slow learners.
At least we come out the other side. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's the vital part.
So Joseph, then face profiling, I just like that.
Yeah.
The whole conversation around that, as I say, fascinates me. How you can actually help people, and it's like about even knowing their behaviors. So tell us more, please, and how I suppose you got into it more.
Okay, well, as I say, I was introduced to it. I started studying back in 1981, and I started teaching it when I moved to Germany in 1985. So I've been working with it for a long time. And there's a relatively clearly defined structure to it. And the understanding is that each area of the face relates to a particular organ or body system, which in turn relates to different aspects of our mental processes and our emotional states. So depending on the size, shape, position of the facial structures in relation to each other and the face shape itself, and then the lines, marks, colors, etc., that occur throughout life, will tell you a lot about the emotional state of the person. To a large extent, even their emotional history will tell you about their basic personality, their behavior style, how they receive communication, how they communicate, how they process communication, what their stress triggers are, how they're likely to respond under stress, who will work well in a team, who's an individualist, and a lot more besides. And it's all there in people's static facial features. It's obviously preferable. I can work from photographs, and I do have clients who send me photographs to work from, but live is always better. And it is, for me, primarily, particularly when I'm working in a group context, it's about improving communication so that people actually understand how best to communicate with the person in front of them. Like we have the assumption that people see the world as we do, and we tend to communicate from the perspective, oh yes, this is what I understand, this is how I understand it, so therefore you should understand it the same way, and it's rarely the case. So part of my purpose, my role, is to help people recognize, no, John or Mary here needs to receive the message in this way, which is different to how I would normally present it.
Okay, so it's treating people as an individual with their individual needs.
Yeah, I suppose many of us grew up with what we call the golden rule of treat people as we would like to be treated, but there's also the platinum rule of treating others as they would like to be treated. And it's the same in terms of communication. So it's recognizing who the person is that you're talking to so that you tailor your message to get it to them in the way they want to receive it. And for me, that can infer that there's an element of manipulation about it, which is not where I'm coming from personally, because for me, it's about building long-term, sustainable, and mutually nurturing relationships. The know, like, and trust principle. That, to me, that's just an absolute core value for me.
Sure, but I think people know that. I mean, I certainly would get that vibe from you anyway.
Thank you.
In your posts and everything that you do, because I know I met you at a conference once, and then we connected on LinkedIn, and it's great because I think, I always talk about this too, our digital footprint, and I think that our digital footprint is like so important in keeping it authentic to ourselves, because, well, that's the way and I suppose it's the way we can all look at really someone's truth in a way, because that's a part of communication as well. Our truth comes out in our content, whether we like it or not at times.
Absolutely. And then I guess there's a microcosm and the macrocosm in terms of the individual connections. And if they are authentic, it's easier to build something. But also we know that our planet is in a serious state. And if we're not being authentic and being constructive about it, there may not be a future there. So the smaller connections we can make from an authentic place, from an authentic constructive place, where we're being mutually supportive and encouraging, there's enough for all of us out there. There's enough for all of us. So taking that approach is actually sustainable, long-term sustainable. Whereas if we go the way we were going in the 80s with greed is good and all of that, it's just the path to destruction for both the individual and the species.
Absolutely. So what's your main drive when you're working with an individual, when you're doing facial profiling? It's that it's all about that communication style, is it, and ascertaining for them their behavioral issues. And
it's authentic communication. It's being real. It's being present to them and for them. It's helping them to feel better about themselves for the experience of having met me. And what I've learned over many years is that even immensely successful people often have serious self-confidence and self-esteem issues.
That could be fascinating so many people, to realize.
Oh, absolutely. And I've found that when I'm meeting people on an individual basis like that, they tend to open up. They tend to reveal a lot of stuff to me that they'd say they've never told anybody else. So obviously that's done in strictest confidence. but it gives them a space to release and to reveal. And then I look to use my skills and my understanding to help bring them to a place where they understand their strengths better, first of all, because we're very good at digging into our weaknesses and analyzing and having to deal with blah, blah, blah. And a lot of it, unfortunately, is just a story which really should no longer be relevant, because really what is important is to be present to oneself now and to move forward from that place, but to recognize one's strengths and one's abilities and bring them rather than all the perceived faults and weaknesses, etc.
Gee, I totally agree, and I talk about that an awful lot myself, actually. Yeah, and I even see it at school. Where I have a teenager doing junior search, and it's like, focusing maybe on something that they may perceive to be a weaker subject, and spending so much time and energy instead of. I'm not saying it's not right to get help and grinds, but like focusing also on the how we excel, because left brain, right brain, maths, English, big difference between how our brain operates in those two. I know I was more the right brain, always go to school.
Indeed, yeah, and even there, it's getting the right help, because we all learn differently, and unfortunately, in our educational system, it is a one size fits all by and large, which just doesn't work. It's very short-sighted. It's just very limited. And so finding what might be perceived as weak subjects doesn't mean the person is actually weak in them. It's often that the teaching is just not appropriate to the individual. So it's individual learning styles and connecting with that, so that you're helping people bring out their potential in a much more cohesive, much more constructive way.
And you do this all by looking at a person's face.
Yeah, it's amazing what people's faces reveal.
But
I'm looking to see the positives.
Love it. Yeah. I always call that there my cranky line there.
Well,
because I feel it's when I'm cross, I'm
well, I have a distinct version of that one myself. And one of the things to bear in mind with that particular one, is that it tends to be an indication of a pattern of hypoglycemia, or low blood sugar levels. So if you're not managing your food intake through each day, and I mean managing, then the likelihood is you're going to feel grumpy or irritable. So basic management of blood sugar levels is absolutely essential when one has that line. And then the knock-on effects is that one tends to be self-critical as well as grumpy and perfectionist, and that leads to procrastination, and then one becomes more irritable and frustrated. So managing basic food intake through the day is absolutely essential to dealing with all of that.
That's so interesting, because I have to, I eat an awful lot of food, but I have to eat regularly, or I do get very hangry. So that's interesting that I actually called it my cranky line. It's so funny, because that's just hilarious how we speak sometimes our truth, isn't it? Like my blood sugar level definitely dips if I haven't been taking protein and managing like that. I eat very healthily, but I can also, I have kids, so I can, obviously if they're eating, I'll have an ice cream too. Why not?
Oh yeah. Well, I have kids too, but I once had hair. But my kids are adults now.
Love it. So is there anything else you'd like to mention to us about what it is you do, and any tips you'd like to give us, maybe in relation to it? I don't know how you can do that now, but
well, in terms of our one quick area, the old saying that the eyes are the windows to the soul.
Yes.
And whether we get into metaphysical realms or not, it's a useful thing for ourselves, first of all, to look in the mirror and ask, do my eyes look bright, or do they look dull? If the eyes are bright and that's the normal state, then our vitality is good physically, mentally, and emotionally. Whereas if the eyes are dull, then we need to look at our well-being. The eyes are the first immediate barometer of how well we are. If the eyes, even if we're unwell, but the eyes are bright, it tells us there's enough resilience there to deal with whatever the health issue may be. Then in terms of looking at other people, when we make eye contact, the two basic things to ask oneself is, are those eyes warm or are they cold? If they're warm, then it's easier to engage. If the eyes are cold and we're getting it, and we'll usually get a message through the body, we'll feel it in the body that there's something not quite right here, but maybe we don't quite understand what it is. It's best to just to be wary and not reveal too much of oneself, certainly not to give much. and see it as a clinical, if one has to deal with an individual with very cold eyes, it should be a clinical exchange of information or business or whatever is going on, but there should not be any emotional investment in it. That's the very obvious stuff to be going on with, and if we get that right, it just eliminates a lot of potential communication problems.
Wow. So you do this now with a lot of organizations as well, Joseph, isn't that right? As well as individuals?
Yeah, I do it in a number of areas. Typically, I can sit in on interviews and negotiations, but what I particularly love is presentations and training, where I'm working with a group of people, ideally where I haven't met them before. So I go in having no prior knowledge of them, and I have to talk about them, but in the context of helping to bring out their strengths. Not in terms of putting people in the spot in any uncomfortable way, but to bring out their strengths so that their communication is enhanced, whether that's within the team or with the external clients and customers. And seeing people, seeing the light bulbs go off when you point out something about maybe there's been a blockage in the communication between individuals or within a team, and so pointing out that maybe somebody's eyebrow shape means they need to have the information presented in a particular way, or something like that.
That's deep.
Yeah. Well,
eyebrow shape.
I've one example of an accountant I was speaking with some months ago, and I told her that she needed to receive the information in bullet point form rather than letting people talk and talk and talk. And she stopped for a moment and said, "Oh, it was just me being stupid. That I was letting people talk, and the information was overwhelming me. And then I wasn't getting I was losing out on business." So when she changed that and stopped people talking and told them to give them the information in bite-sized chunks, she said she was literally getting new business every day. And that was just down to her eyebrow shape. So there's a lot more obviously going on than eyebrows. But it's often little details that can make a massive difference. So it's helping people to identify what those differences are to really boost their effectiveness in communication.
Gosh, that's fascinating. So is it the way that we actually hold ourselves? Is it that we hold our facial muscles in a certain way?
No, that's the body language bit, and then you're getting into micro expressions as well. No, you're simply, even your static facial features, even when you're at your most relaxed, reveal a huge amount about you. If we then for whatever reason tense the muscles because we're sad, angry, upset, depressed, whatever it might be, that adds another layer to the picture. But that, if there's any significant emotional and mental stress going on, that will be revealed in the eyes as well. And particularly when I'm working with individuals, to me, the eyes are like the layers of the onion, because the eyes are telling me a lot about where they've come from, not just where they are right now, and also where they might be going if they don't manage themselves properly.
Right. Yes. Gosh, I knew it was going to be a good one.
Yeah, and so often whether it's in an individual session or in a group session, I'm kind of like Columbo. I'm almost finished, and then there's just one more thing, because there is always at least one more thing, which then in my case always triggers another thing, because I just find people fascinating, and the whole issue, because it's not like, I guess part of why I'm teaching it is because I wasn't always a great communicator, because I bottled up so much stuff.
Okay.
And I see the importance of it in being open, and not just heart on sleeve and pouring one's guts out. I don't mean the kind of over the top stuff like that, but just being willing to share what one has to offer and do it openly, and not to be caught up in other people's reactions either, because that's not necessarily the most important thing. And the people who are open to your message, whether this is in business or in the social context or whatever, the people who are open to your message will get it. And if people are rejecting it, they're probably not your people anyway.
Yeah. So
no straining about it,
I know, but I think that comes a lot with age at times, and I think it's just really try. Well, my reckoning is to try and instill that in my children at a young age,
Absolutely.
rather than having gone through a life experience and learning it, because I know certainly for me an awful lot of my consciousness came in my 40s.
Oh yeah.
Which after like yourself having gone through journeys. But I think sometimes people that are, it's almost like being the wounded healer. When you go through the experience, I always say you have the medicine to share with others then. But you know, I was on a retreat there recently in Glastonbury, and there was a young girl on it, and I thought it was so lovely that she was so positive and so into what she was doing at 25. And I remembering myself being so unconscious and just very, you know, living in the moment, and which there's nothing wrong with, but with a lot of limiting beliefs stored away, fueling my actions though as well.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, and obviously mindfulness has become in vogue in recent years. And I tend to prefer the term mind emptiness, because if we can truly empty our minds, we're letting go of so much of that conditioning, and we're opening ourselves to what's actually possible and being present now to the fullest extent and fullest effect. And that allows us again to interact, engage, and communicate much more effectively from a position of now, rather than all the baggage we've tended to carry.
Yeah.
And it just opens us to just so much more joy and potential and possibility, and just the excitement of life, you know.
So that's interesting when you said that. Someone that has a lot of bags under their eyes, does that sort of correlate with carrying a lot of baggage as well?
Yeah. In Chinese terms, it's indicative of adrenal fatigue, and if adrenal fatigue is not an actual physiological state, but the Chinese perspective is that the adrenals and the kidneys are one, and that they relate to areas such as sadness, disappointment, diminution of willpower, just even spiritual energetic fatigue. So there's all those things wrapped in one, and it's particularly the energetic level, the emotional, mental level that it's impacting, and then people are, to use that American phrase, running on empty. It's really hard to stay at the same place, but they don't have the inner resources, so they're pushing themselves harder and harder, and it becomes more and more of a strain. And you can see it, for example, in Theresa May at the moment. She's been getting darker and darker underneath the eyes, and the eyes themselves are becoming more and more tired. So I'm sure for her well-being, it'll be better when she isn't Prime Minister.
Yeah, and that's funny because, you know, you like, even myself, not having studied facial diagnostics or anything, you know, sometimes you look at someone and say they have very sad eyes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, the eyes convey so much about where the person is at. And you can see sadness, you can see joy, you can see anger, you can see depression. And that's one thing I've noticed. I mean, I've certainly had issues with depression myself. But you can certainly see that when somebody has got issues with depression, you'll see it's almost like, it's almost looking at something behind the eyes. It's like there's a blankness or something, as the light has gone out. And even when they're jovial and the life and soul of the party on occasion, you'll know that the eyes are telling you something completely different. So the eyes reveal so much, and they're the most important thing in terms of making that connection and seeing what's actually going on for the person before they open their mouths.
And it's amazing that it's through the eyes that we do a lot of our release as well when we're sad, isn't it?
Of course. And of course, you do know that men don't cry, but sometimes their eyes perspire. Yeah, and all that nonsense.
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope that changes, and that boys are told from a young age that they are allowed to cry. Because
it's sorry to cut across you there. It's such a powerful release, and even it's not quite the same thing, but men and women, we can carry a lot of old locked emotion in our sinuses. So crying is actually a wonderful way to clear the sinuses and clear that old energy blockage as well.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
the relationship between the emotional and the physical is so, you know, when we start going deeper into it, we really do see that, no, obviously not everything, but like that there's nearly always an emotional component, even if attached to something that's more physical. But the sinuses is an interesting one. And I remember somebody came to me for energy work once, and they were very skeptical, and that doesn't bother me. You know, actually I quite enjoy when someone that's quite skeptical comes, and because they're quite blown away then and she felt her sinuses pop, her ear pop or whatever. I can't remember exactly, but she was just amazed. Yeah. Because it's just energy.
It is. It's all energy. It's all energy. All the physical stuff, like the atom is what 99.99999% what they call empty space. So we're not physically present in the way we perceive ourselves to be physically present. And the whole universe, like I'm working on putting some work together, some events together, connecting the material and the spiritual metaphysical stuff. And I'm part of what I'm doing is using work and quotes. I'm not grounded in the traditional sciences, but I'm using some of the work and quotes, etc., from some of the main people behind quantum physics. And I'm actually then discovering that they, in some cases, studied and found that their ideas and their understanding of physics was solidified by studying ancient Indian texts, traditional, spiritual texts. So, and then we're looking at the area of the psychoneuroimmunology and neuroscience, and they're bringing those fields together so strongly now that they're showing that the body is just a metaphor, really. And if we learn to read what's going on in the body and read it accurately, we can actually transform our physical state as well as our mental and emotional state and the world around us. And I'm not talking about pink fluffy clouds and magic wands. It's actually they're actually demonstrating it in a very solid scientific way, and it's actually being measured. So we're actually living in very exciting times.
Yeah, fascinating. Wow, I love to hear more. I could talk about this forever. So, Joseph, is there anything else that you'd like to make a connection between our emotional and our mental health, and any of the work that you do actually now? Your negotiation skills or risk elimination or body. Was there anything you'd like to leave us with as maybe a tool that we can use? Or I know you talked about our eyes already, or maybe just even a practice that you'd recommend, even if it's not in relation to something that you're doing presently.
Sure. Okay. Well, one of the things I've brought up and has come up a number of times in presentations recently, and well, not just recently, but there's the misconception that only 7% of our communication is conveyed in our words. It's a misrepresentation of a study done by Professor Albert Mehrabian back in 1970 in UCLA, and people come up with the figures of 55% body language, facial expression, 38% tone and syntax, and 7% in the words, and they automatically jump to the 7%. That only 7% of our communication is conveyed in the words, and that's a complete misrepresentation, because really what the study was about was congruency in communication, and making sure that we actually believe what we're saying, that we're committed to what we're saying, and if we're being authentic in that, and we've literally embodied our message, then our communication is so much more effective. So when I'm working with teams or working with people in an interview or negotiation situation, I'm looking to emphasize that to them, because it makes them, if the communication is congruent and they've literally embodied the belief and the understanding and the commitment to their message, it's easier to communicate. There's less strain, there's less stress, there's less effort, and it tends to allow for a much more amicable and amenable situation. And if we do that as individuals in our daily lives, again, it opens up potential for much better relationships on all levels.
Absolutely. Now, for someone that doesn't really know how to embody, because that's something that really, okay. Yeah. So I'd love you to take us on a little just simple way for someone to say, well, how do I embody how I feel?
Okay. Yeah. One simple thing I tend to recommend to people is just take a few minutes aside from everything else you're doing. Let your mind go as blank as possible. Just sit and breathe quietly for a few minutes, and then whether you're visual or auditory or whatever, just imagine yourself back in a place where you felt most happy, a place or a situation where you felt most well, most happy, most contented, most joy, whatever the terms you want to use, and just breathe into that. Just imagine yourself going right back into that state, almost like your own mini meditation, and just breathing it in and letting the stress release from the body as you do it. If you do that, and it does take practice, it's doing it on a regular basis, ideally a daily basis, and if you're just doing a short version of it, do it if you can. And there's no reason why you can't, no matter how busy you are. Do it several times a day, even if it's just 2 to 5 minutes, bringing yourself back into that place and that state. And the more you do that, the easier it is to develop that congruency, because you're not carrying the strain and the stress you might have carried previously. You're in a place where you're connecting with your inner joy, your inner sense of positivity, your inner sense of potential, your willingness to engage with life. And it's just easier to just communicate much more naturally and much more easily with whether it's loved ones, family, friends, workmates, potential workmates, clients, etc. So
because you're really believing and feeling it, and you're believing it so many times that it's easier to drop into that zone, is what you're saying, I think, is it?
Yeah, and you're not trying to be anything, because trying is strain. Trying is strain, trying is effort. And if you're strained, whoever you're talking to, their body is picking it up. And the potential, the potential richness of the communication and the engagement is not fulfilled. And that can occur in couples, as I know, unfortunately. I've been there, where for whatever reason people don't really fully open up to each other because they're not fully open to themselves, and they're not fully trusting that it's okay to reveal, and then they tighten up, and then I say problems occur. That's a whole interesting topic, and one that we're actually for sure. Yeah, it's one actually we haven't discussed relationships yet a lot on this summit, but maybe one for the future for sure. Yeah, that's great. I think that's a phenomenal tool, and I really appreciate you telling people that, because embodying was something that there again on this retreat I'm not long back from was something that I really learned how to do more. You know, I heard it a lot before, but there again, I think when I was away and had the time to practice it without distractions, it was great to actually be in that moment and to go, I've got this now. Absolutely. Yeah. And it is the taking time, and it's a commitment. Yes. Commitment to oneself, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual well-being. And it's, I'm not into crass commercialism, but the old L'Oreal ad, because I'm worth it. Yes. It's a wonderful tagline. And placing that value on oneself, and then the ripples. I mean, I'm seeing it every day in my own life, because I opened up in a way I never allowed myself to do before. The friendships I'm making, the depth of connections I'm making, and that's again socially and business-wise. My life is just so much richer for the experience, and I'm not holding on to the fear and the anxiety and stuff I used to carry, and that then allows me to be much more confident, which opens up more potential. And it's just it's just cumulative. It just builds and builds. Phenomenal. Where to next, Joseph? You already have a book out, haven't you? I do indeed, yes, Face Facts, and it's available through the website. And that's a primer. It's a practical introductory manual to reading faces, and there are a lot of images, and I explain what the images mean in terms of the differences to enable enhanced communication. Again, whether it's business, it's aimed at the business audience, but it's really usable for people in any area of communication. Sounds like a book I want to get for sure. Well, so where do people go actually if they want to, learn more about what you do, or purchase your book, or maybe if they're in an organization and they want to connect with you to come in or do a training in that? Sure. Okay. Well, I'll give you the basic contact details. You can get me at Joseph at Clearsight Communications, and that's Clearsight Communications is all one word. So at communications.com. The phone number is 087-246-183, and the website is clearsightcommunications.com. So I'm easily contactable. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, although I'm not particularly active there. The best way probably is either through any of those numbers or emails and LinkedIn. And I'm always delighted to have contact. Great. I have a button anyway as well under your bio on the website with a link to your website, clearsightcommunications.com. Yep. I put that up earlier, and it's great that, because I like when people, if they resonate with the speakers, they can go on then and they can work with them or find out more about them, or as I say, it's great.
Joseph, that was great. I could ask you loads and loads more, but we could be here all night talking about this. I love it. I love the topic so much, and I just think the connection between, it's like, I suppose, working with reflexology for reflexologists, they're working with the feet. I think it's fascinating that we can read so much into the face, even though I'm not surprised either. I'm not surprised about it, because I think
it is an ancient tradition. It's been used in Chinese society for the last 3,000 years. It's probably a not very well known secret in the West, but it's hopefully me and others are bringing it to the fore and showing people the value of it.
Actually, do you do one-on-ones with people?
I do. Yes,
okay.
I do. Whether that's in person or over Skype or Zoom. Yeah, absolutely.
Great for people to know. Joseph, thank you so much for coming on to the summit. It's great. It's a unique one, and that's what I really wanted to bring here, is bring people that are from different modalities, therapies, whatever we want to call them, and just to allow people realize that even if they have a child maybe, or a partner that they may feel is suffering from some emotional or mental health issue, that they can even realize that it's to be aware that looking at their face, looking out for the signs, and then having someone that they perhaps contact with the hope of resolving, or helping, at least supporting an individual where they are right now. So Joseph, thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure, Dolores. Thank you.
And we'll chat to you again.